The first fine showed up taped to my gate. Not mailed. Not emailed. Taped. Right there on the wooden post, like someone thought they were posting a warning on public land instead of stepping onto private property. It flapped slightly in the wind, bright white paper against dark timber. Impossible to miss. I didn't even open it right away. I just stood there for a second, looking at it, because I already knew it wasn't going to make sense. Nothing about the situation did. I pulled it off slowly, unfolded it, and read the header. HOA violation notice. I actually laughed under my breath. Not because it was funny, but because it was ridiculous. I kept reading. Unauthorized firearm activity within community boundaries. Immediate cessation required. Fine, $1,500. I looked up from the paper and out across the land, my land. Acres of dense forest stretching further than you could walk in a day without cutting through trails I had cleared myself. No shared fences, no overlapping lots, no confusion about where one property ended and another began. And somewhere, just beyond the tree line, sat their HOA. Neat houses, perfect lawns, and apparently, a misunderstanding. I folded the paper once and tucked it into my jacket, then turned and walked back toward the range. It wasn't anything fancy, just a properly built private setup deep inside the property, positioned with safety in mind, natural barriers, controlled angles, everything done by the book. I didn't use it often, just enough to keep things maintained and functional. There was nothing unsafe about it, nothing uncontrolled, and definitely nothing that had anything to do with them. I spent the next hour going over everything, checking the setup out of habit more than necessity. If someone was going to make claims, I wanted to be absolutely sure there was nothing they could twist. There wasn't. Everything was exactly where it should be, which meant the problem wasn't the range, it was them. By the time I made it back to the front gate, there was a car parked just outside it. Engine off. Driver still inside. Waiting. That told me this wasn't a one-time notice. This was intentional. I walked up slowly, stopping a few feet from the gate. The window rolled down. And there she was. Arms crossed. Expression set. That same look people have when they believe they're enforcing something important. "We need to talk," she said. I leaned slightly against the post. "About the paper you taped to my gate?" I asked. "It's a violation notice," she replied. I nodded once. I read it. "Then you understand the issue," she said. "No," I replied. "I don't." Her expression tightened slightly. "You've been discharging firearms within HOA boundaries," she said. I let that sit for a second, then shook my head. "No," I said. "I haven't." She gestured vaguely toward the trees behind me. "The range is clearly within the community perimeter," she said. I followed her gesture, then looked back at her. "That's not your perimeter," I said. "Yes, it is," she replied immediately. "We've reviewed the maps." "Then you reviewed the wrong ones," I said. That didn't land well. "I'm telling you," she said, her tone sharpening. "This activity is not permitted." "I'm telling you," I replied calmly. "This is private property." She leaned forward slightly. "Your land falls within the HOA's jurisdiction." That was the moment I realized how deep the misunderstanding went. Not just a complaint, not just a noise issue, jurisdiction. She actually believed that. "No," I said, "it doesn't." "We have authority over all properties in this development," she insisted. "I'm not part of your development," I replied. "You're adjacent," she said, "which means you're subject to community standards." I almost smiled. Almost. "That's not how that works," I said. She reached into her passenger seat and pulled out a folder, flipping it open like she was about to prove something. "We have documentation," she said. "Then show me something with my name on it," I replied. She paused, just for a second, then flipped another page. Another. Nothing. Because there wasn't anything. "You're creating a disturbance," she said instead. "There's no noise ordinance violation," I replied. "And even if there was, that's not your authority." "We can escalate this," she said. I nodded. "You can try." That irritated her. I could see it, because up until now, people probably listened, complied, adjusted. But this wasn't that. This wasn't shared property. This wasn't a misunderstanding inside their own boundaries. This was outside, and they weren't used to that. "You've already been fined," she said. I pulled the folded paper out of my jacket and held it up slightly. "This?" I said. "This isn't a fine. It's a piece of paper you left on my gate." "It's an official notice," she replied. "From an organization I'm not part of," I said. She straightened in her seat. "If you don't comply, there will be further action." I looked at her for a moment, then asked something simple. How did you get this onto my gate? She didn't answer, which told me everything. You came onto my property, I said. We approached the boundary, she replied. I glanced down at the ground between us. Her tire tracks were clearly past the marker I had set years ago. There was no confusion about where that line was. You crossed it, I said. It was necessary, she replied. I nodded slowly. Because now the situation had shifted, not just from ridiculous to serious. You need to leave, I said. Her expression hardened. We're not done here, she replied. I stepped back from the gate and reached for the latch. Yeah, I said. We are. I swung it open just enough to make a point, not inviting, not aggressive, just clear. She hesitated, then started the engine. But before she pulled away, she leaned slightly toward the window again. This isn't over, she said. I nodded once. You're right, I replied. Because it wasn't. Not even close. As she drove off, I looked back at the forest behind me. Miles of it, unbroken, clearly marked, legally documented, and completely mine. They thought they could find me. Control what I did, tell me how to use land that didn't belong to them. But what they didn't realize was that access to their entire neighborhood ran through a section of that same land. And if they wanted to play authority games, they were about to learn exactly where that authority stopped. The second notice didn't come alone. It showed up with 2 more, all sealed properly this time, all stamped, all looking a lot more official than the first piece of paper they had taped to my gate. Someone had clearly decided to take it seriously now, to make it look legitimate, to make it feel like something that carried weight. I opened them at the kitchen table. 3 separate violations, 3 separate fines, each one larger than the last. Noise disturbance, unsafe activity, non-compliance with community standards. The wording was cleaner, more polished, like someone had taken the time to make it sound legal without actually making it legal. And at the bottom of the final page, there it was. Failure to comply may result in further enforcement action, including restricted access to community resources. I read that line twice. Then I leaned back in my chair and stared at it for a moment, because that sentence told me something important. They still didn't understand. Not the land, not the boundaries, not the situation they were stepping into. Restricted access. From them. To me. I almost laughed again. Instead, I folded the papers neatly and set them aside, then stood up and walked over to the cabinet where I kept the original documents. Not copies, not summaries, the real ones. Survey maps, property lines, access agreements, everything tied to the land. I spread them out across the table slowly, one by one, tracing the edges with my finger, following the lines that most people never look at closely enough. Because buried in those lines was the part they missed. The only paved road leading into their HOA community didn't start where they thought it did. It didn't belong to the county. It didn't belong to them. It crossed a narrow strip of land. Mine. Not by accident. Not vaguely. Clearly defined. Legally recorded. And more importantly, conditional. At the time I bought the property, it hadn't mattered much. The agreement was simple. Standard language most people wouldn't even question. Access permitted, maintained through quiet use, no interference, no conflict. As long as everything stayed reasonable, it stayed open. But reasonable goes both ways. And what they had been doing? Wasn't it? I rolled the maps back up slowly, careful, deliberate, like I was closing a chapter I hadn't needed to open before. Until now. Later that afternoon, I drove out to the edge of that strip of land. The road looked the same as always. Clean, maintained, used. Cars passing through like it was just another public access point. But it wasn't. It had never been. Most of the people driving over it had no idea. And honestly, that wasn't their fault. Because the assumption had always been left alone, until someone decided to push where they shouldn't. The next morning, I started making calls. Not emotional ones. Not angry ones. Specific ones. County Records Office, Land Management, a local surveyor I had worked with before. Every call had the same purpose: verification, confirmation, clarity. Because if I was going to move forward with this, it had to be exact. No guesswork, no assumptions. By midday, I had everything I needed. The boundaries were confirmed, the access clause was still active, and more importantly, it allowed for restriction under certain conditions, conditions that had just been met. That afternoon, they came back. Not just her this time. 2 others with her, both holding folders, both carrying themselves like they expected this to go differently than the last time. "We've issued additional notices," she said as soon as I stepped out. "I got them," I replied. "Then you understand the severity of the situation," she said. I looked at her calmly. "I understand it better than you do," I replied. One of the men stepped forward slightly. "You're accumulating fines," he said. "This can escalate quickly." I nodded once. "It already has," I said. That threw them off slightly, because they were still playing the same game: fines, pressure, compliance. But the ground had already shifted. "You need to cease all activity immediately," she said. "No," I replied. Her expression hardened. "Then we'll take further action." I held her gaze for a moment, then said something simple. "So will I." There was a pause, a small one, but enough. "What does that mean?" one of the men asked. I didn't answer right away. Instead, I turned slightly and pointed down the road behind them. "That road," I said. They glanced back, confused. "It crosses my property," I continued. She frowned slightly. "No, it doesn't." "Yes," I said. "It does." "That's community access," she replied. "It's conditional access," I corrected. The man with the folder opened it quickly, flipping through pages like he was searching for something that would contradict what I just said. He didn't find it. "According to county records," I said, "that section belongs to me." Silence. Because now they were stepping into something they hadn't prepared for. "That doesn't give you the right to block it," she said. "It actually does," I replied. "Under specific conditions." "What conditions?" she asked. I looked at her for a second, then said it. "Interference with property rights." That landed, because now the situation had flipped. Completely. "You can't just shut down access to an entire community," one of the men said. "I don't have to," I replied. "You already gave me the reason." "That's not how this works," she said. "It is now," I replied. They stood there, trying to process it, trying to find a way to push back, to reframe it, to bring it back under their control. But they couldn't, because this wasn't a fine. This wasn't a notice. This was something real. "You're overreacting," she said finally. I shook my head once. "No," I replied. "You are." That ended it. Not loudly, not dramatically, just ended. Because there was nothing left for them to say that would change what was already in motion. As they turned to leave, I checked the time. Because now, timing mattered again. A lot. They thought they could control what happened on my land. Fine me. Pressure me. Push me into compliance. But in less than 48 hours, they were going to realize something they should have understood from the beginning. You can't enforce authority where you don't have it. And you definitely can't rely on access. That isn't guaranteed. I didn't rush it. That was the difference between reacting and responding, and by the time the third day came around, everything was already in place exactly the way it needed to be. The paperwork had been reviewed, the boundaries confirmed, and every step required under the access clause had been followed without skipping a single detail. Because once you move on something like this, it has to be precise. No shortcuts, no assumptions, no room for argument. Early that morning, before the usual flow of cars started heading in and out of the neighborhood, I drove out to the strip of land where the paved road crossed my property. It looked the same as always, quiet, empty, just another piece of road to anyone who didn't know what it actually was. But I knew, and now, so would they. The contractor was already there when I arrived, parked off to the side with everything ready. Posts, tools, the gate itself, nothing excessive, nothing aggressive, just a solid, clearly defined barrier designed to do exactly what the agreement allowed. Restrict access, legally, properly, completely. We didn't waste time talking about it. There was nothing to debate. I gave the go-ahead, and within hours, the first post was set, then the second, then the frame, each step deliberate, measured, steady. By midday, the gate stood in place across the road, clean, visible, undeniable, and closed. The sign went up last. Private property. Access restricted. No extra wording. No explanation. It didn't need one. At first, the reaction was small. A single car slowing down, then stopping, the driver stepping out, looking at the gate like it didn't make sense. A few minutes later, another car pulled up behind it, then another, each one arriving with the same expectation and leaving with the same confusion, because they had never needed to question it before. Access had always just been there, until it wasn't. By early afternoon, the calls started. Not to me, to the HOA, to anyone who could explain why the only paved road in and out of their community was suddenly blocked. And that's when it hit them. Not all at once, but fast. Because once enough people ask the same question, the answers start moving quickly. Within a couple of hours, they were back. Not just her, not just a couple of board members. More. Enough to make it clear this wasn't something they could handle quietly anymore. They parked on the other side of the gate this time, stepping out one by one, all of them looking at it like it was something temporary. Something that could be undone with a conversation. They were wrong. "We need to fix this immediately," she said as soon as I walked up. I stopped a few feet from the gate, calm, steady, exactly the same as before. "It's already fixed," I replied. "You can't block access like this," one of the others said. "I can," I said. "And I have." "This is the only road," he added. "I know," I replied. That didn't help them. Because now the problem was real. Visible. In front of them. "This affects the entire community," she said. I nodded once. "So did your decisions," I replied. Her expression tightened. "This isn't the same thing." "It is," I said. "You tried to enforce authority where you didn't have it. This is what happens when that line gets crossed." One of the men stepped forward, trying to take control of the conversation. "Let's be reasonable," he said. "We can work something out." I looked at him for a moment, then asked, "Like what?" He hesitated, because now he had to offer something real, not a warning, not a fine. Something that actually resolved the situation. "We can review the violations," he said carefully. "They're not valid," I replied. "We can waive the fines," he added. "They never applied," I said. Another pause, longer this time, because now they were running out of ground to stand on. "What do you want?" he asked finally. There it was, the only question that mattered. I didn't answer right away. I let the moment sit, the line of cars behind them growing slowly, people stepping out, watching, waiting, realizing this wasn't a quick fix. Then I said it. "A written acknowledgement that my property is not under HOA authority," I said. "Immediate removal of all fines and records tied to them, and a formal notice sent to every resident clarifying your boundaries." Silence. Because that wasn't small. That wasn't something they could brush aside or handle quietly. That was public, clear, permanent. "That's excessive," she said. I looked at her. "So was trying to find land you don't control," I replied. She didn't respond, because there wasn't a response that worked. The board members stepped aside, speaking quietly among themselves, tension building not just from the situation but from the growing pressure behind them. Residents were watching now, asking questions, demanding answers, realizing that the control they thought existed didn't. After a few minutes, the man returned. "We'll do it," he said, simple, direct, because they didn't have another option. "Today," I added. He nodded. "Today." That was enough. I didn't move immediately. I waited, because words didn't matter anymore. Action did. By late afternoon, the email came through first, then the official document, signed, clear, exactly what I had asked for. The fines were voided, the records erased, and a formal statement was issued to every resident explaining the boundary and confirming that my land was not part of their jurisdiction. Only then did I walk back to the gate, unlocked it, and swung it open, slowly, not dramatically, just enough to restore what had been there before. Access, conditional, respected. As cars began moving again, the tension eased almost instantly, the line clearing, the noise settling back into something normal. But it wasn't the same normal as before, because now, they understood. As for her, she didn't say anything else. No final comment, no last attempt to regain control. She just stood there, watching as everything shifted out of her hands completely. I heard later she stepped down not long after, quietly. No announcement, no explanation, just gone. Because when someone pushes authority past its limits, the consequences don't just affect the situation. They follow the person who caused it. As for me, I went back to the range later that evening. The forest was quiet again, exactly the way it had always been. The kind of quiet that comes from space, distance, and knowing exactly where your boundaries are. I checked everything out of habit, then stood there for a moment, looking out across the land. Unchanged, unchallenged, mine. Because the difference between someone thinking they have control and actually having it is what happens when that belief gets tested. And this time, it didn't hold. How did you like the story? Please like, share, and subscribe my YouTube channel for more interesting stories.